we have among us today is Danny, Galpin, who's a coroner, got his BA in journalism from University of Georgia, graduate of, how do you say that?
Oregon Bright School of Polygraph.
Polygraph. 4 years in Warner Robins Police Department, 2 years Houston County Sheriff Reserve Deputy, associate degree in nursing from Macon State College, 12 years as a paramedic with Houston Medical Center, 13 years of director of emergency room, director of EMS, and manager of Parkway Pavilion and Houston Lake Med Stop, 5 years as a nurse at Pavilion Med Stop, the member of College of Forensic Examiner, certified forensic nurse. Now, he enjoys being the coroner of Houston County for the last 35 years. Please help me welcome, and let's see what he has to say.
Thank you for letting me be here today. Steve Lynn asked me to do this, and I don't do a lot of speeches because I'm not a politician. I'm a working man. So I'll hit some of the highlights because most of the time I find out folks have more questions than the information that I'm passing out. But we'll just start with that the first mention of coroners was back about 900 AD in England under Alfred the Great. He was the king of England, Ireland, and Wales, and he set up the coroner system. Back in those days, it was just a check and balance system. It was, you had a sheriff and you had a coroner, and they just kind of watched over each other. In Georgia, we've got two systems. We've got the coroner system and we have a medical examiner system. Coroners are in 155 counties, and we've got 4 counties that use a medical examiner system. And of course, those are the big counties, Gwinnett, Fulton, Cobb, and DeKalb. It's a more expensive way to do things because they hire a doctor who is on staff full-time. So when you start paying for a full-time physician, it's more expensive than for a coroner. So those counties, the medical examiner actually acts as the coroner. But in all the other ones, you got us. Coroners are elected to a 4-year term. To qualify, you have to live in your county for 6 months. You must be 25 years of age, and you must have a high school diploma, which we have tried for years to improve that with some kind of qualifications, whether medical or legal, and we just can't seem to get it passed. We are governed by Title 45 of the state code. That gives us all of our powers, what we can and cannot do. We're required by law to attend 24 hours of in-service training that's put on by the Georgia Public Safety Training Center. The criteria that we get each year is developed by the Coroner's Training Council. That's a group of 5 individuals that are coroners. They're appointed by the governor and by the Coroners Association. What they do is every year they go through and look at what we need to help us do our jobs better. So they develop the class. It's actually taught at the police academy. You are required. If you do not go, you get decertified. Since you're elected, they can't take away being coroner, but they can authorize the county not to pay you. And I don't know many folks that work for free. So it's most of the time everybody goes to class. The duties of a coroner are to attend all accidents, homicides, suicides, or any unattended death. Last year I worked about 265 cases that were actually cases that I was involved in. I was also notified of about 365 that I was notified, went there. After we got there, we determined that it was just a natural death. A lot of times law enforcement gets there, they're satisfied it's natural, I'm satisfied it's natural, and we call their attending physician. That physician, if he knows that patient and is comfortable that yes, they've not been doing well, or the last time they saw them they were doing worse than the time before. But if that doctor says, yes, I know that patient and I'll sign the death certificate, then we let them do that. I'm also notified of any deaths within 24 hours of an admission to the hospital. The law actually says that if you're admitted unconscious of unknown reasons and die within 24 hours, but if we've just found that it's easier to just go ahead, if it's been 24 hours, call me, we'll run through it and decide whether or not it's something that I do need to look at. If a patient is admitted to the hospital with a hip fracture and they die, I'm notified of it because that's considered an accidental death. Even though folks think, well, they just died of a hip fracture. Well, most folks don't die of a hip fracture. They die of other things, pneumonias and things like that. So I do get notified of those. Some of the good things that I think law enforcement likes about coroners is that I don't have to have a warrant to investigate a death. So if we get to a house, even if they think it's going to be a homicide or some prosecutable case, they'll have to wait until they get a warrant to enter the house. Coroners don't have to. We can go right on in and pronounce that body. The good thing is legally I'm not supposed to walk around through the house looking. I'm supposed to go in, go to the patient, pronounce them, and get out. But even at that, when I'm coming out, I can give law enforcement a lot of information about what I saw on my way in and out. So it helps them. I do have subpoena power. If I'm going to have an inquest, I can subpoena people to that inquest. And by law, they have to go. All the files that I create on any investigation, I have to keep forever. So there's not like a statute of like keep them 10 years, like hospital records. After so many years, they can destroy them. I cannot destroy any records. Once I create them, they are there forever. And I've got out here at the old county jail, they've turned that whole building into a file storage room. And I've got one whole wall that fills up of nothing but my records. So if anything happened from January 1981 until today, I got a record of it. Sadly, we don't know where any records are prior to that. So don't know what happened to them. Let's see. Pretty much that's all the basics of what coroners do. I'm just going to open the floor because I know that y'all always have good questions.
Danny, under what circumstances would you call a coroner's inquest to investigate a death?
If law enforcement doesn't have a absolute, we know what happened. If there's any kind of questions about the death, if the medical examiner is not real happy with what he's finding, that this doesn't really go along with what law enforcement's finding, then they may just say, let's have an inquest. And an inquest is like a trial, but we don't determine guilt or innocence. All we determine is the cause and manner of death. So it's up to, if I have an inquest, I'll subpoena. Usually I have to subpoena about 10 or 12 people. It takes 5 people on a coroner's jury with one alternate. During the inquest, the only people that ask questions are the coroner and the jury. And we just call all of our witnesses in. I subpoena the witnesses. We call them in. I swear them in. And basically we just say, tell us what you know about this case. You know, we can use any information they give us. We can use hearsay information. Attorneys love it because they hear things that they can't hear in court, you know, because it has to be presented and all of this. But in ours, it's real open, so they can ask any questions they want. When it's over, it's up to the jury to determine what they think happened. And it's by majority vote. So there's 5 voting. If 3 of them think this is what happened and 2 think something else, it's what those 3 think. And that would be the finding of the jury. Like I say, we don't determine guilt or innocence, so we're not trying somebody for it. We're just trying to find out, how did they die? What were the circumstances around that death? Then if the law enforcement hears enough out of it that they think that they've got someone that they can prosecute, then they take a warrant and they prosecute like they normally would.
And how often do you have to go through a coroner's inquest?
Rare. I probably haven't done one in 5 or 6 years.
Danny, do you make the decision on toxicology or pathology testing?
Yeah, that's a sore subject because we send all the samples that we collect, we send to the state crime lab in Macon. It takes me generally about 3 months to get any kind of a report back. So if we've got a death and we didn't find anything obvious in the autopsy, and we feel like it's going to be drugs or alcohol or something like that, or poisons, then we send all those specimens to Macon and we wait. And I know it's a real pain for families when I can't sign a death certificate for 3 months, because as you know, when someone passes away, there's a lot that has to be taken care of. I mean, their bank accounts and bills and house payments and car payments, and you know, they just kind of get tied up because I can't give them a death certificate. The bad thing is it does no good to sign one that just says pending toxicology, because nobody will accept it. So it's a bad situation, and really there's just not an answer for it. The state won't put any more people on at the crime lab. They've actually closed 2 of them. We used to have 6 crime labs in the state, and just little by little, with all the cuts in the government, they've had to close a couple of them. So we're fortunate that we've still got one so close by, but it's just takes a long time to get a response from them.
I know you said you don't do yearly training and meetings. What are some of those meetings like? What are some things?
We get a little bit of every kind of training. I mean, we do blood pattern analysis. Sometimes they'll show us, one year we did photography, how to photograph a scene, you know, from the time you walk in the door all the way down, and basically just the same way that law enforcement would photograph a scene. We've had some computer classes to help us with doing our work, because everything now is on computer. So we've had some classes on that to help us with that. We're fortunate now that the state just went to the computerized death certificate, which it's called Gavers, and it's wonderful because funeral home creates it, they put it on the internet, it comes to me, I open it up, I get on the internet, I complete it, when I close it, it goes back to the funeral home, they make sure everything's the way it should be, they send it to probate court here in Perry. And I mean, I've seen the time that they've created it, I've signed it, and it was in the probate court the same day. So that is really nice.
You don't do autopsies, do you?
No, sir. Dr. Whitaker is the medical examiner for the county.
But you can order autopsy done.
I can order it, or law enforcement can order it. Families can request it, but it's ultimately up to the medical examiner whether or not one will be done. He can refuse if he wants to, or he can do one even if we don't ask to do it. If he feels like he needs it to determine cause and manner of death, he can do it. Which is kind of confusing when we say there's a coroner system and a medical examiner system. Coroners are elected, medical examiners are always doctors. We're fortunate Dr. Whitaker is a forensic pathologist, so he's as good as you get. And we've been fortunate that we've had him for about 40 years now. He tried to retire, about 6-8 months ago. He decided it was time to retire. And about 3 months later, he called and he said, "Can I come back? I'm bored." So he's back with us, and we're very fortunate because he's.
Who does he work for?
He actually works for me. I pay him out of my budget.
So when there is a suspicion of foul play, you make the decision whether he can come in and intervene and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, on the real simple cases where we get to the house and it's obviously just a natural death, even if they've not been attended by a doctor, if we're satisfied that it was natural, everything that we're hearing is just like what we see, then I can just sign it out, and we'll just sign it out. It's like heart disease, or if they're a bad diabetic and they've not been controlling their diabetes, then I can sign it out. Most of the time what I do, though, is I'll call the doctor that's been attending that patient. And even if he says, "Well, I've not seen them in 6 months, but the last time I saw them, they were not doing well," but if he still doesn't feel comfortable signing the death certificate, then I can do it. But if it's something that I don't feel comfortable with, then I call the medical examiner, and he does it.
No, most folks, the funeral home calls you and notifies you. Is that correct when they go get the body, or?
Most of the time, I'm the one that calls them. Because most of the time, in this county, anytime someone calls 911 for an ambulance, most of the time when the ambulance gets on scene, when they call in that they've got a deceased person, it's automatic that the 911 center notifies me. And they'll give me the phone number of the paramedic on scene. I call them, we talk to them, and decide what to do. If they said Dr. Jones has been treating this gentleman for the last 20 years, law enforcement's on scene, I'll go to the scene. We're satisfied that it's natural, we call the doctor, and if he says, "Yeah, I'll sign the death certificate," then I'll call the funeral home, tell them what we've got. I'll give them the time that I pronounced, usually in the next of kin, what their name and a phone number. And funeral home comes and picks them up, then they'll take them. If it is something that one need to do an autopsy, or if we just want the medical examiner to look at them, most of the time I'll just let whatever funeral home's going to handle the arrangements, they'll transport for us. If the family does not decide what they want to do, a lot of times family members will be out of town that's going to be making the decisions. Maybe it's a son or daughter and they don't live here. Then what we'll do is we'll just let the ambulance take them to the hospital, keep them in the morgue until we can contact the family and let them decide what they want. Oh, y'all got to have more questions than that.
Just a comment, you say you're not a politician, but you're probably one of the longest serving elected officials in the county. Buying Cullen?
No, Cullen's got me. Yeah, he's got me about 8 years. Yeah.
Pretty good politician.
And actually, funny thing is that when I was working for the police department, I had made the comment that I'd love to go to work at the sheriff's department. And I saw him one day and I said, "If you get elected, would you hire me?" And he said, if I get elected, I'll call you. Well, he got elected, and he did. He called and he said, I got an opening if you want it. And at the time, I had just got put on the motors. I was doing nothing but riding a motorcycle and working traffic. And I was happy. It's like, nope, I'll pass. Thank you anyway.
What's the most interesting case you worked 45 years?
There's a lot of interesting cases. One of the good ones was the one, the man that they just executed. They cut. They
Utterback was it?
Yeah. Actually, they had killed that gentleman, buried him out off 96, and it was out in the woods. But of all the luck, and that was their bad luck, someone came in and they started clearing that land because they were going to start building a subdivision. And one of the graders, as it was leveling, rolled the body up out of the grave. And so that's how we found out about it. And it was interesting. I mean, because they took him apart. There were parts buried all between Georgia and Florida. And but Sheriff's Department did an excellent job, got a conviction, and we heard the outcome. So yeah, that was interesting. A lot of cases are interesting. I couldn't tell you, I've probably went to 3,000 autopsies, and I can tell you that every single one of them, I see something I've never seen before. And the doc will take something else like, I haven't seen that in 10 years, and it'll be some unusual, just a tumor or something, but it's like every case is interesting. And I go to all of them.
Is there ever a humorous coroner story?
Well, I'll tell you that I know folks think a lot of times when they see law enforcement and the coroners, everybody at a death scene and everybody's standing around laughing and cutting up, and they think it's probably a lot not very appropriate. But when you're dealing with death all the time, if you don't have a little bit of a sense of humor, you just can't continue doing it. I mean, you're facing folks at their worst times in their lives. They've just lost a loved one, and it's tough, and you try to be respectful, but when you get away from view, I mean, you got to laugh a little bit just to keep from crying sometimes. I've enjoyed it because when I go to a scene, I'm dealing with someone at their worst time, and if I can do something that makes them feel better or gives them some comfort, then I feel like I've done a good job. This is not one of the best jobs in the world, but it's one of the most rewarding because there's lots of times when you finish, you feel like you've really helped somebody, and that's what makes it worthwhile.
Danny, you must get a lot of calls that way. Are there any deputy coroners that serve under you?
Actually, I have been fortunate that this year the commissioners actually gave me two deputies. So now I have weekends off. I went for 2 years with no help. I was on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But for the last 8 years, I've had one deputy coroner who is a paramedic. She's worked at Houston Medical Center for 35 years. Her ex-husband was actually an investigator with the Sheriff's Department. So she's very good. And this year, when I started with the commissioners, I just told them that it's getting real busy, and I really do need a little bit of time off. So he said, "Yep, go ahead, hire you another one, and take the weekends off." So I hired Kelly Rankley, and Kelly is Dr. Whitaker's secretary, who assists him doing the autopsies and does all the paperwork and all the autopsy reports. Real smart lady, and so she's my second deputy, and they just alternate every other weekend. So I work Monday through Friday, and they work Saturday, Sunday.
You had any false alarms?
Oh, all the time. That's
How
okay.
does that happen? I mean, I know some cases, but I just wondered what you run into.
Yeah. There's a lot of calls that I get that I don't need to be called on. If someone is signed up under hospice, by law, when they pass, you do not notify the coroner nor any law enforcement. And families at the last minute, when they're losing their loved one, they just can't stand the thought of not trying to do something to save them. And I get called a lot, and once I talk to them and they're saying, they're under hospice, it's like, I can't help you. You need to call the hospice nurse. They'll come out, they'll pronounce, and they've already got all the arrangements made. So I get a lot of those, and hospice is wonderful. Let me tell you, I praise them. I think hospice is an awesome organization. The other thing that I deal with a lot is with LifeLink of Georgia. That is the organ procurement agency that's licensed by the state of Georgia. So anyone that's going to be an organ donor, that's who does it. And I've got a really good working relationship with all of those people. I can promise you that my brother-in-law, he just passed away last year, but he was on the waiting list for a kidney for 6 years and got it. And he lived for 2 years, and then of all things, died of another problem. Had a ruptured aorta and died. But I can tell you, LifeLink is a wonderful organization. If you have any thoughts of donating, make sure that your family knows you want to be a donor, so that as soon as it happens, we can take care of it. Everyone that I deal with, I call LifeLink, I notify them of that death, and they call the family and ask them, do they want to be a donor? Because even if you've passed away, there's a certain time frame that you are still eligible to donate your corneas, long bones, your long bones in your legs, and skin. And it may not sound like much, but I can tell you that these people that are having back fusions and burn patients, they couldn't survive without these donations. And so if you have any indication that you want to be a donor, get on the list. They help, I promise you. What else?
Dr. Whitaker used to say, and I remember him saying that when he came as a doctor, nobody ever paid attention to him because he was working with sticks all the time.
Yeah. He was good. It's funny because back years ago, this is kind of funny. Years ago, the hospital required every year, every employee had to have a physical. And they had several doctors on the panel that would do your physical for you. And one day, Dr. Whitaker walked through and I said, "Can you do my physical?" And he kind of smiled and he said, "You want me to do it?" And I said, "You're a doctor, aren't you?" And he said, "Go in the room." So we was in the ER, and he just pulled me in one of the rooms and gave me one of the best checkups I'd had. And when I turned it into the hospital, they're like, "Dr. Whitaker can't do that." I'm like, "Yes, he can. He's a doctor." And they accepted it, but it was really funny that they didn't think about that. But yeah, he was a great doctor. Well, listen, it's been a pleasure, and if there's anything I can do, all you got to do is call the coroner's office. I carry the phone with me 24 hours a day, so if you call the office, I answer. So been a pleasure. Thank you.